Coming up this week,
a big part of now being able to get beyond early adopters to making this more comfortable is now to also make that public charging experience feel synonymous with fueling your car, right? And a big part of that is payments.
Well, hello, friends, and welcome to episode 176 of the EV Resource Podcast. I'm Zach Hurst, and each week I bring you the latest EV news, information, and interviews with industry experts. And this week, I have a conversation with Carly Furman, CEO of Nayax North America, about EV charging payments and how that integrates into public infrastructure to make the experience as easy and simple as possible, ultimately making public charging as equitable and as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. Before we get to the conversation, I do want to thank Titan Auto and Tire in Central Virginia for their support for the podcast. Titan has some of the very few independent repair shops that are qualified to work on EVs and hybrids. And from hybrids to Hummers, they fix everything. For more information and to schedule an appointment for your vehicle, go to TitanAutoTire.com. Carly, I want to welcome you to the EV Resource Podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on. What we're going to talk about, I think, is maybe one of the most important parts of transitioning to using essentially a new fuel source for the transportation that we have, and being able to pay for those services, I'm sure you agree, is rather important to all of that. But I want to, before we really dive into the conversation and get into all of that, I want to give you a chance to just talk about your background a little bit, what brought you to Nayax and your current role, and kind of how all that played out.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me today. You were correct. I do love this topic of payments with EV. I'm personally really excited about payments in general, but specifically when it comes to being in the forefront of kind of any new exploration of it's like the new horizon, right, with EV. So it's exciting to get to be part of that, and especially from the payments aspect. So as you mentioned, my name is Carly Furman, and I am the CEO of Nayax North America. So Nayax North America is headquartered in Hunt Valley, Maryland. That's where I'm currently sitting and based out of, and my U.S. and Canadian based team. And how I came into the Nayax fold was a little over 9 years ago. I actually am a CPA by training and went through kind of the public accounting route, and then kind of transitioned into private industry post M&A implementation was kind of where I kind of found myself. So that's kind of how I got connected with Nayax. Nayax HQ, so the R&D for Nayax is based in Tel Aviv, Israel. And my husband is actually Russian Israeli. So that's how I ended up in Nayax, and they conveniently needed an American CPA that had some post M&A implementation experience. So that's why I came into the picture. And I'm a big believer in when opportunities come, you just don't say no. So kind of just kept not saying no and took on more and more opportunities and responsibilities, and found myself with this fantastic role now of getting to lead North America for Nayax.
Sure. That's got to be exceptionally exciting these days, with really the biggest, you could say, upset to the transportation industry. We're going through this transition that, over the next, we'll call it 15 to 20 years, the landscape is going to be very different. And I really imagine that you all with Nayax are going to have a rather large role to play in how consumers interact with the charging network operators that are providing electricity essentially as a service. Just in case people don't know really about Nayax and what it is that you all provide, let's just start with the basics of what you all do.
So at Nayax, we are a payment ecosystem, right? So if you're thinking of the whole payments landscape, you have the payments hardware, but that's really just an enabler, especially when you're looking at more complicated integrations and payment landscapes, like the connection with the payment technology and a electric vehicle charging system, but then connected to the grid and all those other complexities.
Sure.
So next, we're a payment ecosystem, right? So we act as a payment solution provider. So that means the hardware, right? Which is really just the enabler for us being able to then provide integration services, an entire platform with data dissemination, the security we provide, the PCI DSS L1 certified servers, which are able to keep then our customers, which in the case of EV is usually the CPOs, right? So the charge point operators having to not worry about all that payment security and compliance that, becomes our responsibility. And we additionally act as what's called a payment facilitator or payment integrator, which means that we're the ones who are actually certifying our payments hardware with the end processing partners and dealing with all that kind of interchange optimization and all the things that make payments unique, and also that tipping point between being profitable and not being profitable, which is a lot to manage, especially when you're looking at unattended payments, specifically unattended payments that can fall into the smaller transaction value. So our bread and butter is unattended payments, right? So unattended payments can mean the food and bev, it's massage chairs, it's retail kiosks, of course, EV chargers, unattended car washes, really anything where someone wants to be able to take card present payments, so pay with their credit card, mobile payment, without the need for a clerk to actually facilitate that payment, which does become a completely different kind of payment ecosystem. Security flow is all of that. Sure. Along with also the integrations and that kind of proprietary knowledge with how to integrate with each type of unattended machine.
Mm-hmm. And I think from a user standpoint, we've spent our whole lives interacting with unattended payment systems. With transportation specifically, we pull up to a fuel pump and we insert our credit card, or now, of course, some allow you to tap with, I guess it's an RFID chip, and then it just magic, and it works, and then we can start fueling our vehicles. With electric vehicle charging, people are going to expect basically the same experience,
and you get the service or product that you are desiring to get, right? That should be what the process should be.
Exactly. So let's dive in a little bit more on the technical side of explaining the magic, how it works, the steps that the payment information takes when they're inserting a credit card or using a chip,
or tapping their credit card or paying with Apple Pay. Yep.
What happens from that point?
Sure.
Like, how does that work?
So what basically we have to look at is what happened before all of that in order to make that hopefully a very seamless and smooth process for the driver, right?
Sure.
So there is a lot of integration work that Nayax has done with the OEMs ahead of time, right? So our end customers from, let's say, an ongoing processing and service perspective are the CPOs, but they generally want to get a finished product that is ready to, be installed and then, do all the magic that happens, with connecting to the grid and energy management and, a whole other conversation, right, of all those different, powerful inputs that can be happening there. But from our standpoint, we work with the OEMs to actually integrate our payment devices and technology using proprietary SDKs or APIs, and also some more commonly known protocols that are now in the process of becoming more standard, in order to make sure that there's a smooth handshake between the charger and the payment device going both ways, right? When to start, when to stop, how to measure it, all of that kind of thing. So that's, again, where the idea of Nayax being a payment ecosystem, so the payment really being at the center of everything, is important, because all those APIs need to be always running from our servers, server to server integrations. So, there's a lot from making sure that all the parts are always kind of communicating between, different APIs and SDKs that we provide, and also are part of the standardization protocols.
To somebody who may not be familiar with technology, or even, I have some in the audience that do not own an electric vehicle yet, and maybe they've never tried a public charger, and that might be one of the things that's preventing them from actually adopting an electric vehicle.
Totally.
It might feel so foreign to them. When it comes to the payments, though, generally that should be the same experience that they have with any other
system, right? And I think, you hit the nail in my humble opinion, exactly on the head with that, right? I think a lot of, early adopters are going to always be early adopters of technology, right? It's a certain kind of, whether you're talking EVs, whether you're talking solar on your house, whatever you're talking, whatever, there's going to be people that are always driven to want to be the first to experiment, that are, doing their own research, that, new is not scary, new is cool. I think we're now, getting to the point where I wouldn't say we're completely beyond only, early adopters of EV drivers and moving on to having to move past that, but we're quickly approaching that apex. And I think a big part of now being able to get beyond early adopters to making this more comfortable is now to also make that public charging experience feel synonymous with fueling your car, right? And a big part of that is payments. So I think what made it feel very clunky, or has made it feel very clunky, especially actually as some of these larger national chains and more CPOs have come into the picture, is the closed loop public charging, right? Having like 5,000 apps and the different key fobs and all of this different stuff that you're like, okay, now even the early adopters, like, this is kind of getting annoying. And even so, how do I still work it with, if I'm renting a car or if I'm loaning my car and plug and charge, but is that really changing? Is it just kind of an app in a different way? There's a whole lot of that's now being kind of, I think, focused on more. And that's where it comes into the beauty of, well, why can't you just pay to charge a car with a credit card and not have to have a subscription and not have to, go through, that kind of process? And that's where Nayax really has been focused for several years, since about 2018, but it's now starting to really gain, a lot of traction. So we helped kind of lay that infrastructure with a lot of big CPOs, start being able to have those public chargers that can take a normal credit card payment, whether, again, it's tapping card, inserting card, or paying with, Apple Pay or Google Pay, without having to have a subscription base. So, in my opinion, that's crucial to get really adoption accelerated.
Yes, absolutely. It seems to be the common consensus that we are transitioning from the early adopter stage into that early majority. And as a result, the end user, the amount of knowledge that they have about electric vehicles as a technology, but then also how to charge, how to use them, this new group needs a much simpler process to be able to adopt just the technology. And I think making the charging process at public charging stations as simple and easy to use and as easy to understand as possible is one of the very important things that should be addressed. And I'm sure it is being addressed. One question I had that I think a lot of the audience will have is related to the reliability of the charging infrastructure in general. Some networks are better than others, and there's certainly some that have received a lot of criticism. From a user standpoint, it's hard to identify where the fault is. When is it a timeout of communication between the charger and the car? Is it related to the payment processing? Are you running into a lot of situations where it's just very difficult to integrate Nayax into, like you were saying, multiple CPOs, and then within one network operator, you can have multiple different pieces of charging equipment from multiple suppliers? Does that really kind of complicate and muddy up the process to be able to provide the most reliable experience when it comes to even just paying for the charging?
Totally. I mean, the whole thing is, right, there's so many inputs right now, right? So I think depending on how you're wired as a person, it's either seen as like really exciting or really scary, right? So,
Sure.
I guess I'm wired at the first part, right? That's like really exciting, right? To get to kind of be part of that and help with that kind of standardization, right? So, also kind of from an education perspective, and an industry perspective, myself and my team were very active in different kind of consortiums and different kind of thought panels on how to standardize things without making it too rigid, but kind of start to set some kind of, just processes and standards and things that are going to make it so that it doesn't feel like totally the wild, wild west where, again, this is not snacks and sodas, right?
Right.
Like, if it doesn't work and you can't pay and there's an issue with the machine, it's not like, oh, now I'm just hangry and I have to go,
Uh-huh.
walk, 300 feet to, find another snack or soda, right? That could mean that you're, stranded somewhere. So, having a standardization process as much as we can has been very important, right? So working with and ongoing work with the OEMs to make sure that the integration from the payment perspective and the chargers is standard and synonymous. Then it kind of, I don't want to say it doesn't leave as much open to the CPOs, but it kind of does, right? If the handshake between the machine and the Nayax payment device is going to be standard, someone knows they're going to come, they're going to, present their card or their mobile, or their mobile phone to pay in a similar way. They're going to then get, a notification on the charger. They're going to be able to start charging. They're going to have a backup method, right? If in your case, right, if they, did have a closed loop, app that for some reason didn't work, or they're using plug-in charge and it didn't work, they can then, have that comfort to know that they can pay, just by, bringing out their credit card and tapping it. That kind of helps with all that uncertainty.
Sure. And you mentioned plug-in charge. I'm curious, actually, because I really don't know. With the ISO, what is it, 15118 standard for plug-in charge, basically so that an EV owner can just roll up to a station, plug in. There's already either with like a unique MAC address or some other method that the payment and their car ID is already recorded with whatever charging network provider they're plugging into. Is Nayax still involved with the payment processing part of that experience, or are you guys only handling when somebody's using the actual physical hardware?
From our perspective, there's a lot of different ways we can be involved, right? From, more of a payment facilitation, can happen from card not present, which is, not having to actually have, presenting a card, being more of an e-commerce based transaction, or also from card present. But, I think we're talking about at least EV charging right now. The card present is, I think, what is, at least to me, the most relevant as our perspective, right? To really kind of get that, plug-in charge is I think it's cool. It's cool technology. But I think there's a case to be said. Is it really that much different? If you're going to have different tokens per car for every single CPO, and then same thing, what happens when now, you let a friend, borrow your car, or you rent a car, when you're traveling for business or whatever, there's still a whole lot of, it's not demystifying the payment process and making it feel more standard to fueling, right?
Sure.
It's going the opposite direction. So again, I think, is it cool? Is it going to also, there's a whole thing about which, the standards are still changing
Yes.
all the time, right? We have legacy cars that are already on there that are not going to have the capability to actually have the upgrades anyways for plug and charge. So I think every and any way that someone can and wants to pay should be an option, but it should not replace the ability for someone just to walk up and present a credit card or their mobile phone and tap and pay and get the service that they're expecting to get.
Sure. We need to be prepared for really anybody to be using that charging equipment, where somebody might not have the knowledge to set up plug-in charge, or they might not have the app with with one of the charging networks. Especially a lot of these days with so many rental companies renting EVs out. Well, if somebody needs to charge that, they need to be able to go to a public station and pay for that. They're not going to have an account typically, set up beforehand. And I've been sitting at a charger where I needed to set up an account, load it with money in order to pay. And that is just such a headache where many times, if there was a way to just insert a card or use contactless payment, then that just makes that one barrier removed,
Yeah.
it
And
just
these are all
a lot
those
easier.
little micro experiences, right? That end up
Yeah.
contributing to a positive purchasing experience, regardless of what industry we're in. And I think of,
Yes.
when you were mentioning that about, having having to, the app and having multiple apps, right? There's a cost barrier to that too. So when you're also looking, beyond
Yeah.
early adopters, it's not just, I think we all have, the family member or the friend that's, less tech savvy, and they're going to like not be that comfortable with, having to have, different apps and things like that. So there's the tech savvy side of it, but there's also the cost prohibitive side of having how many apps with top up payments and not remember, exactly at the end of the month, how much is going to actually be taken out of, your account. So when we're looking again beyond early adopters, we have to take in all walks of life, all age groups, all demographics into account. And again, that's where it just kind of seems logical to let people pay with what they're accustomed to for managing their own budget and also managing their own, tech savviness.
You brought up a really, really real point there with having money in apps. I won't say the name of the network, but there is a network here in Richmond that they offer free level 2 charging. But in order to start an account, you still have to fund it with money. So I've got, I think it's like $15 or $20 sitting with this app that I will likely never use the money where, I mean, in this case, of course, free charging, it would be nice to just be able to plug in and use it. But even if I had to pay for that, if I don't use that network often, I would rather use a credit card and just pay for whatever I was using in that individual session than have, a reservoir to pull from that. Who knows how long that would take.
For sure.
I'm a little bit more fortunate than I would imagine a lot of people where, having $15 sitting unused just out there, for me, that's not the end of the world. But I can relate to people where $15 might be make or break for their day of what they need in order to just make it to the next part of their life, Yeah. So we have to be very mindful of situations where providing equitable access to the charging infrastructure is exceptionally important. And I think that's where being able to utilize a card, whether it's a credit card or a debit card, or, I mean,
A
whatever,
prepaid card, right? Putting money on, it's as long as it's branded, with a major network, card brand network, right? It's accepted at a Nayax payment terminal. So
I want to ask, actually, there are a lot of different credit card companies out there, between like Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, and whatnot. Outside of those four, do you guys provide support for others as well, or is that primarily it?
When you're looking at card brand usage and things like that, these are just, public stats, right? Visa makes up, 70% a little bit, here, more there depending on, demographic, right? MasterCard, you're going to get somewhere in the 20%. And then it kind of, Discover, Amex make up, somewhere, a blend of the rest, right? But we also take Union Pay. We're also integrated with JCB, right? So some of the different Asian card brands, really anything else that would come along, from Nayax's perspective, is not as relevant when we're talking about EV charging. We're also integrated with, student cards and payroll deduction systems. So, again, it's coming back to that any way that someone wants to pay, we want to make sure that we're giving them that ability to pay for the service or product that they want in a way that they want to pay.
Sure. And that is one of the things that just makes sense, at least from my perspective, that we need to have a variety of different potential ways to serve the end user. And I think it seems like at least the language coming from the federal government, as there's a lot of guidance from the administration of how they want to see the infrastructure built out. The National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, or NEVI, that everybody pretty much abbreviates it. I believe that's requiring being able to accept major credit cards as a part of the integration with the charging equipment in order to receive any kind of federal funding.
I'm curious, and maybe you can't answer this. Was Nayax consulted or involved with giving any advice to help shape that policy?
Yeah, I mean, we are very active in making sure that when payments is becoming into the mix and part of the conversation, that if our expertise is wanted and asked for, that we would like to be part of those kind of conversations. But also, I will say, I think it's ongoing. This was not a one and done kind of conversation too, right? I think
Sure.
we're just realizing everything that, it's the Pandora's box, right? Of this is just the tip of the iceberg. So with,
Absolutely.
throwing out cliches, right? So I think there's a lot of making sure that, the government and the infrastructure and companies are all aligned, hopefully with always the best interest of the end consumer and propelling that forward, right? Hopefully that's the end goal, right?
Yes. You had mentioned briefly about being able to use some of the back end like API to integrate with the equipment and some of the software on the back end that CPOs are going to use. Do you have to communicate not only with the CPOs about integrating with what they're doing on a software aspect, but then also, is there any integration required for the hardware?
Yeah, historically, we do provide a proprietary SDK API kit for actual integration with the OEMs and the payment device, right? So there is that way to physically be able to form the payment integration, and then still, it goes kind of into that Nayax payment ecosystem, where then the secure transaction, that secure encrypted transaction is going to our servers, and we're able to disseminate the information, server to server, and have CPOs pull into their management suite or utilize our management suite, that kind of thing. But there also is integration server to server, right? So that you actually don't have to have the payment the payment device itself, actually even having that API with the OEM, and actually then having it a server to server integration to actually kind of make those commands when to start the charge and the charge, how much. So
yeah, I suppose, if somebody is pulling up to a charger, they insert their credit card, the first communication is going to be to verify the card itself. So that's going to have to go from the physical hardware of the card reader through communication. Either I'm assuming that you guys hop on with whatever the chargers provide. So either Ethernet, Wi-Fi, or cell signal.
Yeah, so we provide the Nayax device actually has its own 4G LTE communication modem and SIM in it, but also it can also leverage the communication method that the charger has.
Okay, so there's some redundancy there where maybe one part of it fails, that it can still
exactly, and there's a fallback. Yeah, so there's
awesome.
So actually the Nayax servers are actually the hub there, right? So that's where the PCI DSS L1 certified servers. We have a redundant skipping server architecture, right, for guaranteeing at least 3 nines, but it's actually more than that. So actually, when the someone comes and they present their method of payment, that authentication process then goes to Nayax servers. We then communicate with our processing partners. You're getting that kind of that very quick command then back from the issuing bank, and then that's also what can say then to the charger, whether it's server to server integration or direct integration with our OEM to payment device API to then start the charge. And then when you get the final amount, that settle amount, the same kind of flow kind of goes back, and we get that kind of command. So everything kind of flowing through again our server. So the server being that payment ecosystem hub of actually being able to control authorization amount, getting the final settle amount, start the charge, end the charge, send then data, to a different management system. So, that's kind of where the payment device becomes, the conduit, if you will, of the entire transaction flow. And it's, where the payment solution provider aspect of what we offer comes into play, right? Not kind of seeing it as, just a piece of payment technology or a payment device that's standalone, because there is just so much integration that's crucial to actually making the whole transaction process happen quickly and efficiently.
The expectation is that it's going to work 100% of the time. That's not realistic because nothing works 100% of the time, but we can get very, very close to that, 99 point whatever percent. We've touched on security a couple of times, and this is one area where I'm not going to ask to dive into the technical part of that. But what I am curious about that I've actually had a number of people mention to me before when having a conversation about a physical card reader on a charger unit, where people know like ATMs or some convenience stores where the shady type of person will install like something over that that actually steal credit card information. How have you guys approached that as a potential issue for electric vehicle chargers that, to the conversation we've had, are not typically manned? There's nobody watching over them every minute of every day to make sure that shady creatures don't show up and start doing shady things.
This is what we do. This is our business, right? So, before, kind of joke around, right? Nothing, if you're going to look for a more high fraud, potential environment, right? For, shifty, shady folks, you don't have to look any further than, an air, the air machines, put, air in your tires. We've been in that space for 15 years, right? Same payment technology, right? So it's the same encryption. It's the same. That's why EMV is super important. EMV is, again, using the chip card technology, right? That has a dynamic code in it, not allowing, the mag swipe or the swipers, right? Which is static information, which is substantially easier to lift. So, is anything 100% foolproof? No. We also have no issue like going online and like, card not present has a much higher actually risk from a credit card fraud perspective. So, generally speaking, EMV, so using the chip card technology, which is all Nayax readers. That's why we insert, or even when you're paying with contactless, that's still using chip card technology or EMV technology to have encryption for each individual transaction and creating that more secure handshake.
For those that might be worried about that, as they're approaching a charger that has a reader on it, is there anything that they can kind of look for that might indicate that maybe there's something they should be concerned about before they put their payment information in? Or is that kind of something that is very difficult to actually identify?
Yeah, I mean, again, from our standpoint, there's so much integration work that has to happen too, anyways, for the transaction to communicate with our servers, and also, from the actual integration with the payment device and the actual terminal, that, it really, if someone starts messing with things too much, it's not going to work, right? It's not going to, and it's, basically, don't swipe your card. Like, just don't, like, stop swiping your card anywhere. Like, anywhere you go, if they ask you to swipe your card with a chip in it, like, just don't do it anymore, right? That's like the number one, do not swipe your card. Insert it, tap it, don't swipe your card anymore.
That's good advice. I myself have actually started to transition to using mobile pay with my phone for nearly everything. That still runs through your ecosystem when somebody's using a mobile device versus an actual physical card, correct?
Correct. It's still considered a card present payment. That is correct.
Okay. Gosh, like, there's so many different ways we could.
I told you we could talk about this.
I know.
Cover like an hour.
What's the future when it comes to electric vehicle charging that Nayax would really like to see come to fruition?
Yeah, I think, we're making great strides, right? But this understanding that we want at the end of the day to put the consumer first, right? The driver first. And what should that be? That should be something that is easy, that is intuitive, that is clear, and feels natural, right? And giving people the options to pay how they want to pay, right? So I think, at this point, it's, if you want to call it greenfield, blue ocean, it's exciting with the EV, right? But there's also some things that leave a lot of unknowns for those that are not as comfortable with new technology. So from my standpoint, it's doing whatever we can to make someone who's on the fence about being comfortable driving an EV, take the payments aspect out of that, right? Have them not worried about if, how am I going to do, a long car drive, or how am I going to rent a car, right? And the easy way to do that is to make card present, being able to just walk up and pay with your credit card, similar to how you fuel your car now. So I think, just keeping that focus always in the back, or maybe even the forefront of our mind, is the most important, right? Because all the other technology, the security, all of that is fantastic. But if people aren't comfortable, or it's not clear on how to actually put that into practice, we're missing the boat. So, at the end of the day, this is not, if your day being good or bad should not be based on if you're able to actually successfully charge your car when you're out and about, and on a longer drive, or in an area that you're not familiar with, right? It should just work the same way you can expect that with fueling. So I think as long as everyone tries to keep that as much in focus and not die in the details of being enamored with their own technology, and just remembers, like, at the end of the day, what is the goal, right? Like, we all have our case studies in our mind. It's a mom, it's a friend. Would they be comfortable and be able to figure this out pretty intuitively? Then we're doing our job. And that should be the focus.
Absolutely. My parents, and I love them. So mom, dad, if you're listening to this is not an attack, I promise. But they are not the most technologically savvy people. And I can't imagine them downloading 3-4 apps and working out all of, like,
it's just a headache, right? All of a sudden it's just like sounds unappealing, right? It's just like not too much.
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't even like that. And I've got all of them because of that. Being an early adopter, that's just part of what we've been willing to do. The next group of people that are entering this space are not going to be knowledgeable. They're not going to be willing to. And if we force them to download 50 apps or whatever, like, it's just not going to happen. They're going to be like,
really not needed.
Never mind, I'm good.
Exactly. And it isn't needed. Like, why was it needed? Because it's how it was, not because it's how it needs to be, right? So
right.
I'll quote my mom now, right? She'll, KISS, keep it simple, stupid, right? At some point here, do not overcomplicate things that don't need to be overcomplicated, which is, in this case, the end consumer experience. Behind the scenes, it should be highly, as complicated as it needs to be in order to keep it simple for the end consumer. And I think that's where paying with a credit card, being the end result, is super important.
Awesome. Well, Carly, I don't really have anything else. I think we've covered a lot. It feels like a whirlwind. I can't believe that we have been talking actually for much longer than I had suspected we would. It seems like one of those simple things that you just go, all right, well, there isn't much to cover. But as it turns out, we could keep going and going and going. But I want to be respectful of your time, as well as the time of anybody that might be watching or listening to this. So before we end, is there any advice or anything that you would want to point out that maybe we haven't covered that people should know?
I don't know, Zach. I feel like I need to say something really insightful right now, but I really do think kind of like really, touch just about every aspect of this. So again, I want to say something, very smart right now, but I think we really were pretty comprehensive. So I appreciate that you were, and it was so easy to talk to you. So thank you for that.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on. And
thanks for having me.
If anybody is curious about following Nayax, or do you guys have like press releases and information that you put out there in terms of what you all are involved in?
We sure do.
Just the website would be the best place for them.
Yeah, log on to nayax.com. You can kind of follow the links there to see, different information we put out. Follow us on LinkedIn, on Instagram, there's a Facebook community page. So, any social media channels that someone chooses to follow. So just find Nayax.
There it is. Well, Carly Furman, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right. I really enjoyed the conversation with Carly. We got into a lot more than I had anticipated before starting that conversation, even though I feel like I know a decent amount about EV charging and EVs and this industry in general. There is just so much that can be learned. And if I can learn all of this, that's why I know I can bring value to all of you to share some of the things that might be just a peek at parts of the EV industry, the process of charging in this case, that maybe is just not something that you'd be aware of otherwise. So hopefully you got a lot out of this. If you're interested in seeing more interviews with experts like this and you have somebody in mind, even if it's somebody you do not know specifically, go ahead and email me at hello@ev-resource.com with who that might be, what company they work for, or even if it's a topic that you want to hear addressed on the EV Resource podcast. Before I end, I want to thank our Patreon supporters. Patreon is a platform that allows audience members like you to support various creators directly with a monthly contribution to support their efforts and help keep things running. In my case, with EV Resource, it's really helpful. At the director tier, which is the top tier that I have available, I want to thank Rajeev, Narayan, and Andy Cooper. And at the executive producer tier, Christopher Lawrence. And as always, I want to thank everybody else that supports our efforts here at EV Resource with a contribution through Patreon. It does mean a lot to all of us here. It's one of the ways that I'm always going to keep the EV Resource podcast free for all of you. I don't want to put all of this behind a paywall or require membership in order to share the valuable expertise from people like Carly that it should always be free, really. So another way that I'm able to do that is through affiliate and advertising partnerships like Titan Auto and Tire. I also have connections with TireRack.com, Goodyear, Ghirardelli Chocolates, OMU Lithium Batteries, and a whole bunch more. If you're interested in the full list of brands that are partnered with EV Resource, you can find that list at ev-resource.com/deals. And I definitely encourage you to support those organizations and businesses that have chosen to support EV Resource. If you have any feedback, I invite you to send that in via email. Once again, that email is hello@ev-resource.com. And thank you very much for watching and listening, and I'll see you next time.